moving towards the fire. It appeared to him that the conversation had taken a most interesting turn. "When? When you brought the tray in here for me, I suppose." "And I suppose you explained to her that I had the idea all out of my own little head." "I told her that I should never have dreamed of asking such a thing." The susceptible and proud young creature indicated that the suggestion was one of Mrs. Maldon's rare social errors, and that Mrs. Maldon had had a narrow escape of being snubbed for it by the woman of the world now washing silver. "I'm no more afraid of burglars than you are," Rachel added. "I should just like to catch a burglar here, that I should." Louis indulgently doubted the reality of this courage. He had been too hastily concluding that what Rachel resented was an insinuation of undue interest in himself, whereas she now made it seem that she was objecting merely to any reflection upon her valour, which was much less exciting to him. Still, he thought that both causes might have contributed to her delightful indignation. "Why was she so keen about having one of us to sleep here to-night?" Louis inquired. "Well, I don't know that she was," answered Rachel, "if you hadn't said anything." "Oh, but do you know what she said to me upstairs?" "No." "She didn't want me even to go back to my digs for my things. Evidently she doesn't care for the house to be left even for half an hour." "Well, of course old people are apt to get nervous, you know, especially when they're not well." "Funny, isn't it?" There was perfect unanimity between them as to the irrational singularity and sad weakness of aged persons. Louis remarked, "She said you would make everything right for me upstairs." "I have done, I hope," said Rachel. "Thanks awfully." One part of the table was covered with newspaper. Suddenly Rachel tore a strip off the newspaper, folded the strip into a spill, and, lighting it at the gas, tendered it to Louis' unlit cigarette. The climax of the movement was so quick and unexpected as almost to astound Louis, for he had been standing behind her, and she had not turned her head before making the spill. Perhaps there was a faint reflection of himself in the window, or perhaps she had eyes in her hair. Beyond doubt she was a strange, rare, angelic girl. The gesture with which she modestly offered the spill was angelic. It was divine. It was one of those phenomena which persist in a man's memory for decades. At the very instant of its happening he knew that he should never forget it. The man of fashion blushed as he inhaled the first smoke created by her fire. Rachel dropped the heavenly emblem all burning into the ash bin of the range and resumed her work. Louis coughed. "Any law against sitting down?" he asked. "You're very welcome," she replied primly. "I didn't know I might smoke," he said. She made no answer at first, but just as Louis had ceased to expect an answer, she said, "I should think if you can smoke in the sitting room, you can smoke in the kitchen, shouldn't you?" "I should," said he. There was silence, but silence not disagreeable. Louis, lolling in the chair and slightly rocking it, watched Rachel at her task. She completely immersed spoons and forks in the warm water, and then rubbed them with a brush like a large nail brush, giving particular attention to the inside edges of the prongs of the forks, and then she laid them all wet on a thick cloth to the right of the basin. But of the knives she immersed only the blades, and took the most meticulous care that no drop of water should reach the handles. "I never knew knives and forks and things were washed like that," observed Louis. "They generally aren't," said Rachel, "but they ought to be. I leave all the other washing up for the charwoman in the morning, but I wouldn't trust these to her." The charwoman had been washing up cutlery since before Rachel was born. "They're all alike," said Rachel. Louis acquiesced sagely in this broad generalization as to charwomen. "Why don't you wash the handles of the knives?" he queried. "It makes them come loose." "Really? Do you mean to say you didn't know that water, especially warm water with soda in it, loosens the handles?" She showed astonishment, but her gaze never left the table in front of her. "Not me." "Well, I should have thought that everybody knew that. Some people use a jug and fill it up with water just high enough to cover the blades and stick the knives in to soak. But I don't hold with that because of the steam, you see. Steam's nearly as bad as water for the handles. And then some people drop the knives wholesale into a basin just for a second to wash the handles. But I don't hold with that either. What I say is that you can get the handles clean with the cloth you wipe them dry with. That's what I say." "And so there's soda in the water?" "A little." "Well, I never knew that either. It's quite a business, it seems to me." Without doubt, Louis' notions upon domestic work were being modified with extreme rapidity. In the suburb from which he sprang, domestic work, and in particular washing up, had been regarded as base, foul, humiliating, unmentionable, a toil that any slut might perform anyhow. It would have been inconceivable to him that he should admire a girl in the very act of washing up. Young ladies, even in exclusive suburban families, were sometimes forced by circumstances to wash up, of that he was aware. But they washed up in secret and in shame, and it was proper for all parties to pretend that they never had washed up. And here was Rachel converting the horrid process into a dignified and impressive ritual. She made it as fine needlework. So exact, so dainty, so proud were the motions of her fingers and her forearms. Obviously washing up was an art, and the delicate operation could not be scamped nor hurried. The triple pile of articles on the cloth grew slowly, but it grew, and then Rachel, having taken a fresh white cloth from a hook, began to wipe, and her wiping was an art. She seemed to recognize each fork as a separate individuality, and to attend to it as to a little animal. Whatever her view of charwomen, never would she have said of forks that they were all alike. Louis felt in his hip pocket for his reserve cigarette case, and Rachel immediately said, with her back to him, "Have you really got a revolver, or were you teasing, just now, in the parlour?" It was then that he perceived a small unframed mirror hung at the height of her face on the broad central perpendicular bar of the old-fashioned window frame. Through this mirror the chit, so he named her in his mind at the instant, had been surveying him. "Yes," he said, producing the second cigarette case. "I was only teasing." He lit a fresh cigarette from the end of the previous one. "Well," she said, "you did frighten Mrs. Maldon. I was so sorry for her." "And what about you? Weren't you frightened?" "Oh, no, I wasn't frightened. I guessed, somehow, you were only teasing." "Well, I just wasn't teasing then," said Louis triumphantly, yet with benevolence. And he drew a revolver from his pocket. She turned her head now and glanced neutrally at the incontestable revolver for a second. But she made no remark whatever, unless the pouting of her tightly shut lips and a mysterious smile amounted to a remark. Louis adopted an indifferent tone. "Strange that the old lady should be so nervous just to-night, isn't it? Seeing these burglars have been knocking about for over a fortnight. Is this the first time she's got excited about it?" "Yes, I think it is," said Rachel faintly, as it were submissively, with no sign of irritation against him. With their air of worldliness and mature wisdom they twittered on like a couple of sparrows, inconsequently, capriciously, and nothing that they said had the slightest originality, weight, or importance. But they both thought that their conversation was full of significance, which it was, though they could not explain it to themselves. What they happened to say did not matter in the least. If they had recited the Koran to each other, the inexplicable significance of their words would have been the same. Rachel faced him again, leaning her hands behind her on the table, and said with the most enchanting, persuasive friendliness, "I wasn't frightened, truly. I don't know why I looked as though I was." "You mean about the revolver in the sitting-room?" He jumped nimbly back after her to the revolver question. "Yes, because I'm quite used to revolvers, you know. My brother had one, only his was a Colt, one of those long things." "Your brother, eh?" "Yes. Did you know him?" "I can't say I did," Louis replied with some constraint. Rachel said with generous enthusiasm, "He's a wonderful shot, my brother is." Louis was curiously touched by the warmth of her reference to her brother. In the daily long monotonous column of advertisements, headed succinctly "Money" in the Staffordshire Signal, there once used to appear the following invitation: "We never refuse a loan to a responsible applicant. No fussy inquiries. Distance no objection. Reasonable terms. Strictest privacy. £3 to £10,000. Apply personally or by letter. Lovelace Curzon, 7 Colclough Street, Knype." Upon a day Louis had chosen that advertisement from among its rivals, and had written to Lovelace Curzon. But on the very next day he had come into his £1,000, and so had lost the advantage of business relations with Lovelace Curzon. Lovelace Curzon, as he had learnt later, was Reuben Fleckring, Rachel's father. Or more accurately, Lovelace Curzon was Reuben Fleckring, Jr., Rachel's brother, a young man in a million. Reuben Senior had been for many years an entirely mediocre and ambitionless clerk in a large works where Julian Maldon had learnt potting, when Reuben Junior, whom he blindly adored, had dragged him out of clerkship and set him up as the nominal registered head of a money-lending firm. An amazing occurrence! At that time Reuben Junior was a minor, scarcely 18, yet his turn for finance had been such that he had already amassed reserves, and, without a drop of Jewish blood in his veins, possessed confidence enough to compete in their own field with the acutest Hebrews of the district. Reuben Senior was the youth's tool. In a few years Lovelace Curzon had made a mighty and terrible reputation in a world where expenditures exceed incomes. And then the subterranean news of the day, not reported in the Signal, was that something serious had happened to Lovelace Curzon, and the two Fleckrings went to America, the father, as usual, hypnotized by the son, and they left no rack behind save Rachel. It was at this period, only a few months previous to the opening of the present narrative, that the district had first heard aught of the womenfolk of the Fleckrings. An aunt, Reuben Senior's sister, it appeared, had died several years earlier, since when Rachel had alone kept house for her brother and her father. According to rumour, the three had lived in the simplicity of relative poverty, utterly unvisited except by clients. No good smell of money had ever escaped from the small front room which was employed as an office into the domestic portion of the house. It was alleged that Rachel had existed in perfect ignorance of all details of the business. It was also alleged that when the sudden crisis arrived, her brother had told her that she would not be taken to America, and that, briefly, she must shift for herself in the world. It was alleged further that he had given her £45. Why £45 and not £50, no one knew. The whole affair had begun and finished, and the house was sold up in 4 days. Public opinion in the street and in Knype blew violently against the two Reubens, but as they were on the Atlantic it did not affect